Hi, my name is Ed Johnson, and you're watching Making with an Edge. Thanks for stopping by. In this video, I wanted to cover some basics for Fusion 360 scripting using Python. The background here is I recently had a discussion with someone about the quality of engraved text with 3D printing and how as the font sizes get small, or depending on how deep or shallow engraving is, or even extruding text, what are the best settings to get the best result? And with FDM printing, as you can see here, it's I got maybe other issues I need to get dialed in on my printer, but the text can be a challenge when it starts getting smaller. So I've been messing with Fusion 360 scripting for a while. So I whipped up this model that you see in the picture here and whipped it up in Fusion. Didn't take me long, nothing tricky or complicated. I did some 3-point arcs and put the text on a curve and extruded it. And then it got me thinking, boy, it'd be really nice to test other fonts, other font sizes, change the text that I want to print out, all of those things. And frankly, even though creating the sketch with the text was pretty trivial and easy, going back and editing it to try a new font and editing, I did 4 arcs, different strings of text, so editing all of those settings to render a different font height, etc., just got tedious. Not hard, but I thought it'd be perfect to whip something up in a script where I can change a few variables and have it quickly create the sketch with the new text fonts and sizes that I wanted to use. So what I'd like to do today is just run through some of the basics on how to create a sketch from scratch, and take my code. You can copy and paste it and hopefully find it relatively easy to edit and make changes. So I wanted to get started with just the basics, and I do have a companion article on my website that is going to kind of walk through everything I'm going to cover in this video. But there's also a link where you can download my code, and so put a link down in the description if you want to pause and fetch that. The website is Making with an Edge, EDJ, for Ed Johnson, that's me, .com. And a little ways down from the top, I've got a download link for the script, so you can just click the button and save it here. Open it up in your downloads folder. It's a zip file, so you'll have to open it up and extract it. I'm a big fan of 7-zip. I use that to manage my zip files. So I'm just going to extract everything here in my downloads folder so I can find it easily. And then the text, I've got a little instruction basics for getting it installed, but this is the actual code here, the create text on a path, that we're going to be covering. And the code is also on the website, so you don't even actually have to download it. You can expand this little accordion box here, and this is a copy of the code as well. So this is the article on my site. If you want to bail now from the video and head to my website and follow along there, feel free. If you do want to keep watching the video, you can keep the website open. I got a copy link that we're going to use in a second on the code here, so I'm going to just minimize this for a moment, and I can get rid of my downloads because I don't need that. Okay, so let's get into Fusion and see what's involved in creating a script here. So on the Utilities tab, you can just click the Add-ins button here. As you can see, the shortcut is Shift-S, or you can hit the drop-down and do Scripts and Add-ins, which is a Shift-S. Or if you aren't going to write your own script and you want to go fetch something from the Fusion 360 App Store that somebody else has written, whether it's another developer or somebody on the Autodesk team, this link will take you to their website where you can download and install apps that have been written elsewhere. We're not going to cover that in today's video. We're going to go here. The other thing I would point out is you don't have to go to the Utilities tab. When you start in a solid environment on a new design, you can just hit the shortcut Shift-S, and all of those things will get us to the same place. So the Scripts and Add-ins dialog will open, and if you've never created scripts or from scratch, this My Scripts section will be empty. Don't click the plus button, even though it's kind of intuitive to do that. If you hover over it, you're going to add an existing script. Now, that's one method to install my script, is you can take the download that we did, and you can take the folder that was in that zip file and copy and paste it to a location where these scripts are located. But we're going to go through the process of creating it like we're kind of writing the script, even though we are going to do some copying and pasting later. Add-ins, on the other hand, are another type of script that are typically written so they can run in the, once you run them, they stay running in the background, and they will typically add options to the menu. An example of that is, you can see the ones with the little circular icon behind them. These are currently running in the background. So parameter IO is one that I added in from the Fusion 360 App Store. If you do anything with user parameters, I highly recommend this one. Let's get back to our script. So Shift S, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a script here. So when you hit the create, it opens up a second dialog here. Fusion currently supports 2 languages, C++ or Python. My preferred is Python. I just think it's easier for me, although I have done some dabbling in C++, I'm just more comfortable in Python. I'm kind of self-taught in programming, so I apologize up front if you see that I'm not following best practices or anything along those lines. Anyway, back to our script. So let's go ahead and create this new script. We are going to call this create test text on a path. And the description is simple. I can't type and talk at the same time. So this is a simple script to create some test text, and the author is me, Ed Johnson. And target operating system I'd leave as Windows and Mac. Even though I have never run into anything that is specific, you can hit the drop down and make it. I'm on a Windows PC, so I don't know if Mac users have the opposite where you can make it specific to a Mac only in Windows and Mac, or vice versa. Anyway, Windows and Mac is fine. There's nothing operating system specific here that we need to worry about. Folder location, this is where the script is going to be stored. I used to change it and put it in my documents folder. Since I've gone back to storing them in the default for Fusion. Fusion handles it fine either way. I just like having everything where Fusion kind of expects to find it, and I don't have to go looking, or if I forgot where I put a script. So when we hit create, it's going to pop our title up here, create text text. Oh, text. We're going to change that. Test text on a path, and go ahead and hit create. Nope, sorry, hit edit. And when you hit edit, what it's going to do is launch the Visual Studio Code editor. And if this is the first time you've done that, you are probably going to have to go through some prompts. I can't remember what that's like. I might have to go back and uninstall Fusion just to see what that process is like, because frankly it's been a couple years since I've done it. But yeah, Visual Studio Code is pretty simple to install. You just kind of follow the prompts and accept the defaults, and eventually you should get here. So when you create a new script from scratch, Fusion pre-populates it with basically a hello world, or I'm sorry, a hello script. And this is actually a short bit of code that if you save it and run it, I'm going to go ahead and save that. Let me drag this out of the way, and we go back to Utilities, and we hit our Add-ins button. That brings us back to our script dialog. There's the script we just saved. We can run that, and we get a little pop-up dialog that you can see in the code here. It did exactly what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to bring up a message box in the user interface that says hello script, and it worked. So let's flip over to either our download folder. We have 2 choices here. We can go to my website and copy the code, or we can go to the downloads folder that we unzipped everything into and open up our text file. So I'm going to pop that open. So this is the same text that you can get on my website. Just give it a Control-A to select all, and a Control-C in your favorite text editor. I use Notepad++ and Ultra Edit are 2 that I've been using Ultra Edit for a number of years. I've kind of used Notepad++ more these days, but I never bothered to change the file association. So by default, my text file's open in Ultra Edit. Anyway, with that copied now, we can flip back to our Visual Code Editor and highlight all of our code here. We can delete it or just paste over the top of it with a Control V. And there's our code. So let's go ahead and save that. And now if we go back to Fusion and go to our add-ins, there's our script, and let's run it. Oops, we had an error. And honestly, I let that happen on purpose so I could show you what's going on. So errors are going to show up in two different places, basically. If the script loads and there's any kind of syntax error or something that doesn't allow the code to get to even line number 1 to do its thing, the error messages are going to show up here in this text command window. If you don't see this window and you run a script and it's like nothing happened, check this window. If it's closed, hit the little plus and open it up. This is where the error is going to show up. And it looks a little cryptic, but basically it's telling us we have inconsistent use of tabs and spaces in indentation. And it's identifying at the end here line 116. One thing about Python is that, unlike other languages, it is very picky about white space and indents and kind of the structure of your code. So in the editor window, a visual cue that I purposely ignored a second ago was this little red squiggly line is going to highlight any syntax errors that Visual Studio Code sees when it parses it on the fly. And it's some kind of tab error, even though our code is lined up properly with all the tab markers and stuff. I run into this a lot when I get code from other sources, whether it's another website or copying and pasting it. So a quick tip I have that usually fixes it for me is if you highlight all of the code with a Control A and you hit the tab key, it'll tab all the code over, and it looks like we got rid of our little squigglies except for at the top here, because we have our first line, it can't be indented. That's one of the rules in a Python script. So we hit tab, and then now I'm going to follow it with a shift tab. And so I basically pushed all the code over by one tab character, and then I pulled it back to where it was, and it got rid of the syntax errors and the white space issues that it was flagging. And the one thing I figured out here is, and I usually what triggers it is if you actually have a tab character here instead of spaces that push it over. So I'm going to just undo this really quick just to show you. Whoops. So here's my error here, and notice if I left and right arrow over this, I'm jumping a whole tab space, where on the line above it, I'm just going one space at a time. And that's true of all these other codes. So somehow when I copied this code and saved it, I ended up with a tab character in here. So if I just take this out and manually type it, so I replaced the tab character with 4 spaces, and that's effectively what the select all tab shift tab does, is the editor takes care of kind of replacing any tab characters with spaces. The reason I do a select all is because it's unusual that I only have one tab to fix. Usually there's multiples, and sometimes many multiples depending on the length of the script. So anyway, I digress, but that's what caused that error. So now that we've fixed our syntax errors and we go back, then the other thing you can do in this window is you can right click to clear it, so we know we've fixed our errors. Now when we run the script, hopefully we won't have any more problems. And we didn't. So there's our script. It quickly ran and created our test text on a path, on 4 paths actually. So what the script does is it creates these multiple 3-point arcs. It identifies the inner ones as construction lines just to make it easier to extrude. It draws a line here on the widest arc to close the profile off, so we can easily extrude this to create a 3D model or whatever we're going to do out of it. And the text itself, some default text and default sizes that the script starts with, but we can go edit all of that. So part of the reason, let me show you here, I'm going to edit this sketch. So creating this, like I said, was pretty trivial to do it from scratch without a script. I mean, it's not hard to draw 3-point arcs and make construction lines and do all of that. And even creating the text is easy. You come in here, you create text on a path, you give it a string of text you want to place on it, you pick your font, you pick your font height, you save it, hit OK, you go on, lather, rinse, repeat, and do the same thing on the other 4 lines of text. But what if you wanted to quickly change this and test a different font or different font height. It's going to quickly get tedious if you want to have a need to create a lot of these or just want to try different ones. So, I can come in here and I can make this a 10 point. I'm going to change my text to say 10 millimeter. I'm going to increase my actual height here to match that, which is 10. You can see I've already got a problem where I've kind of exceeded the range of my arc here. So let's shorten up our test text a little bit so it fits within the bounds. And oh, you know what? Maybe I want to try, let's see what Arial Black, maybe that's a nice thick font. That'll probably extrude better. Oh, great. We just blew through our size again. So let's take some more text out till things fit. Okay, that's close, but it looks like we made it. And by the way, this string I picked I just tried to pick some characters that were rounded, skinny, dots on the I's and J's, things like that. The whole idea is just, it's a test. We want to try different things. So now we've got a 10-point font on the outside one. We hit OK, and now we want to do that again on the 6-point. Maybe we want to crank this up to an 8. You can see how this quickly gets tedious if you want to test a lot of fonts. Yeah, maybe this one we want Arial Narrow, and we're going to make this one an 8 because we're looking at bigger fonts. So you get the idea. We've got an issue here where things are kind of crashing into the row above it, all of that. Not a big deal, but we can fix this with scripting. So before we get back into the script, just to show you, script is totally quick and dirty. I don't have it doing any extruding. I don't have it doing any engraving of text or any of that. That can all be done in scripting, but for me, I didn't want to go through the pain of editing this sketch every time I wanted to make a change. So I just wrote it to be, again, quick and dirty, create this sketch so I can quickly select a profile, I can extrude it, -3 millimeters, and now I can extrude my text by selecting it quickly, and maybe I want to cut that in, 2 millimeters. Let it think a little bit. We hide our sketch, and you can see we have our little test part ready to be sent to the 3D printer, even given our funkiness up here. So now I want to change this, and I want to do it quickly. So I can go back again, edit my sketch, change all my fonts, do all of that. But let's look at the script and see what we're doing here. So I can hit, again, I don't have to be in the Utilities menu. I can just hit Shift-S to bring up the script dialog box. And I can select it and hit Edit. And because I actually didn't close the Visual Studio Code Editor, and I would recommend that's the way you operate when you're working on a project like this, especially developing a script. Leave it open, make your tweaks, code changes, improvements, whatever, save it, and just flip over to Fusion and run your tests. The one nice thing about scripts versus add-ins is you don't need to stop and restart Fusion every time you want to make a change to a script and have it reload it when Fusion boots. Because the script runs and does its thing and is done, you can edit the code, save it, and run it again, and it'll run the new code. And actually, add-ins aren't that bad either, but they do get a little tedious when you're doing it. I've run into this with a couple of add-ins I've done, where you don't have to reboot Fusion, but you do have to stop and start an add-in that's running in the background. So if you have an add-in running, created the menu items, you have to kill it by stopping that, and that'll kind of unload it, and then update your code, save it, and then start it again, and it'll load your new code. So just walking through the script really quick, this is the way Python works. I think kind of a best practices, even though it's not required, is you try to run some code, and then if it fails, handle the exception. And that's what this is doing here. So we're setting up the block of our code lives in this try section. So I created some variables here to identify our test string with the text that we're going to on the path. We can change this, so maybe saying that it's text is a little redundant. Our test font, this can be any valid font name that's on your system. So I'm going to try a different font here. I'm going to try Arial Black. And I'm making a typo on purpose so I can show you what happens if you do make a mistake and have a syntax error like that or a typo. I've added a scale factor, and this is a factor that is basically treated as this percentage. So, for example, 1.2 would be 120%, 2 would be 200%. What this does is that where all the sketches are getting placed and the size of the fonts are all getting, not the size of the fonts, but the spacing between the paths for the fonts are getting scaled up or down by this factor. So in the comments here, you can see through trial and error, I determined that if I use an Arial black font, I need to crank up my scale factor to 1.25. So I'm going to pretend like I don't know I have an error yet, and I'm going to go ahead and continue to make those edits. So basically, you've got three simple variables at the top. You can edit the string, edit the font, edit the scale factor. And then the other thing you may want to edit, if you scroll down here a little bit further, this is the section where we're defining those 3-point arcs. And arc 0 is the inner arc, and arc 5 is the outer arc that kind of define the bounds of our profile. And then the 4 arcs in between are where the text is going to be placed on. And the comments here kind of explain how this gets coded. So you can see here when you draw a 3-point arc, if you think about it, how you actually do it in Fusion, you give it either a center point or a left point and then an end point. So you give it the 2 end points and a point somewhere along the curve, and it'll create the arc. And that's what this code is doing right here. ADSK is short for Autodesk. These are built-in functions that handle 3D point geometry in Fusion. And so what this code is doing is actually creating a 3-point arc. You can see it's creating a sketch curve by 3 points, defined by 3 points, and those 3 points are the starting point, any point along the arc, and then an end point, and in that order in this little array. And again, I'm babbling about the code, but this is where you can edit, and you can see how the scale factor is multiplying the dimensions accordingly, so it will stretch or shrink the arcs that we're creating by the amount of that scale factor. That's all that's going on here. And then this next little block here is just defining which of those arcs are construction lines. And the reason I did construction lines on the inner arcs is just makes the whole profile of the semicircle easier to select. You don't have to select multiple profiles when you want to extrude it later. And then the last piece is here is just drawing a straight line that closes the 2 endpoints of the largest arc, so we can, again, select that closed profile when we want to extrude it. And then the inputs are the text that we're going to place on each of the arcs, and that's what these 4 sections are. So we have our 4 different font sizes are defined here, and this is actually where the script can be improved and might be a good project for you to attempt later. One thing about the Fusion scripting is in the back end, Fusion does all of its calculations based on centimeters. So what this input string is that it's creating here is the text that we want to display plus that text string variable that we identified at the top. So in this case, I wanted to have a string that said 4 millimeters followed by the test string text, and then this is the actual font size here. Font height rather, not font size, font height. And again, because I want it to be 4 millimeters, and this value is expressed in centimeters, I need to take 4 divided by 10, which is 0.4 to get 4 millimeters, converting centimeters into millimeters. And then you can set also parameters. If you've ever done text on a curve, you know that there's icons in the dialog box within Fusion to flip it horizontally or vertically. And the font name is being set up from the test font variable up above, so that's one thing. But one thing that could be improved, like I said, is you could have variables for each of these 4 inputs we're creating. So you could have the prefix text or no text if you don't want it, and the font height. It would be easier to edit the values doing everything near the top of the script instead of having to scroll through it. So anyway, I've got the 4 millimeter, 5 millimeter, 6 millimeter, and 8 millimeter font heights that were the default. So let's say we want to take this one to a 10. We would make that change there. And this goes from 0.8 to 1.0. And maybe we want to take this one to I don't know, let's try this one at a 7.5. Not 7.7, 7.5, so that would be 0.75. Yeah, so after making this changes, and then the last bit of code here, this is the command that actually puts the text on the path. So it takes this text that we've defined up here for the size, what the text is, whether we want it flipped horizontally or vertically. And that's the other thing it's doing, is it's centering it on the arc. That's what this little bit is doing right here. Anyway, this line right here is what's going to take this input 1 that we've defined and actually drop it on the arc. And then finally, we have the exception handling. Again, if we have an error anywhere up in our code above, instead of just failing and not reporting any error or reporting something extremely cryptic, this uses a traceback function that Autodesk has included that kind of tries to format the error message in something that's a little more readable, even though it does look pretty scary when they pop up. So let's save this and go back to Fusion. And I'm going to just start a new design here, and I'm going to go to my shortcut of Shift-S to open the dialog, and I'm going to run my script. And bang, as expected, because I made a typo in my font name, I got an error. And this is what that traceback function does. So if you take a moment and just kind of scan through this really quickly, you can usually identify the line number where the problem occurred, and you can actually see the code it was trying to execute. It was trying to add that text on that path. And then the error message that it threw was actually an invalid input font name. So that's our clue that we made a typo in the font name. So we hit OK. And you can see that code errors like this will potentially run part of your code, but not all of it. And so it got far enough along to create our sketch with the 3-point arcs, construction lines, and draw the line to close off the profile. But it didn't, when it came time to lay the text on the path, it said, hey, I don't know what this font is and I can't continue. So that's when it threw the error message. So we can undo, Control Z. And if you notice it, with scripting, when you undo a script, it does it as the steps were executed in the script. So it's just like, kind of like steps in the timeline. So if you're doing things like extruding and cutting and rotating and doing all kinds of other functions, those will actually create different entries on the timeline. But because we did everything in this one sketch, that's why it showed up there. So, and then we keep hitting undo, it eventually uncreates, is that a word? It removes the sketch because like we never created it to begin with. So now let's go back and fix our code, and that was at the top where we made a fat finger typo in Arial black, and so we'll change that. We will save it, go back to Fusion and run our script again. This time I'll do Utilities, Add-ins, select my script and run. And that one worked. So you can see here I got my new Arial black font on everything. I got my 10, my 7.5, the changes we made. To confirm this, that it worked, we can double click, select the text. We can see that we got a 10mm font. Okay, this one should be 7.5, and it is. Yeah, so now this is ready to be extruded and create a 3D model as you see fit. So I can just real quickly select this profile. I'm going to do a -3mm extrusion, and then I'm going to extrude my text. Let's try these two. I'll do a -1 on those. Then I'm going to do another extrusion, and these I'm going to emboss. So let's do a 1mm emboss. And if we hide our sketch, you can see that now we've quickly created our little test piece here. And we can export that, send it to our 3D printer, and give it a shot. The other thing I would mention, again, I'm leaving this up to you. This was just a tool to create the sketch, so I could then, slice and dice it or do whatever I want from there. One of the things I did, for example, I wanted to do a test print that didn't need to be this big. I was going to just create something a little smaller. So I come back in here, I edit the sketch, I grab the line tool, and I can, I can cut a slice of the pie out here, maybe a couple. Finish the sketch, and then if I go back and edit my first extrusion here, and I deselect this, turn my sketch back on, and maybe I just want to do this little piece of the pie. That is a quick way to edit this. Oh, I have to edit my other extrusions here. Because I embossed this, it's still showing up there. So let me change this to a -1, and I'll have it do a cut. And there we go. So yeah, so now I've got another hacked up little model that will print much quicker than the full size one, and kind of give me an idea how my text is going to look. So use this, don't use it. I wanted to share this as a way to kind of give a quick introduction into how to get a script created and running in Fusion 360, and I hope to share more of this type of thing as I move forward. So again, my website has a companion article if you want to go back and refer to that and not listen to all the blabbering I did in this video. Got some screenshots to kind of support it, and I think I covered everything pretty well. Error messages, kind of how the script works and creating it. Oh, and I also have links in here that I highly recommend you check out. The Autodesk Knowledgebase has good information on how to install a add-in or a script and how to create one from scratch like we just went through. And then they also have really good documentation, and they also have a very good support forum as well. So I think I will update this page to add a link to the support forum, because it's a little bit different than the one for the documentation. So thanks for staying to the end. Appreciate it if you'd give it a like and maybe subscribe if you like what I've done here. I hope to, can't make any promises, but I hope to continue to make some content with little nuggets of things that I learn and stumble upon. And it could be more Fusion 360 stuff. It could be 3D printing. Could be some design stuff. Yeah, I don't know. It might even be some woodworking. And I have my eye, now the latest rabbit hole I have my eye on is a laser engraver. I think those are super cool. And another sidebar while I'm babbling at the end here is another user in a Facebook group I'm part of does have a laser and was using it to engrave 3D printed parts, and it really came out looking pretty dang cool. So now I've got the bug to get myself a diode laser and just start cheap and simple and see how it goes, and I think I'll have a lot of fun with that. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. Thanks again, and we're going to call this one a wrap.